Hey folks, Ken Hovind here in the crew at Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama, 4th of July. This is our boot camp 2024. Come on down, visit our Dinosaur Adventureland. If you have questions or comments, you can comment on, let's see, we're on a bunch of channels. Our website is drdino.com, D-R-D-I-N-O. Phone number, 855-BIG-DINO. I'm extension 3. Joseph, our tech guy, extension 4. If you want to schedule a debate, you want to come down and get a cabin to stay for a couple days at Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama, call extension 5. Okay? If you want to order our materials, 855-BIG-DINO, extension 1, my wife Sandra, or just come down and see our place, see the bookstore. I debate a lot of atheists, 358 now. I'm ready for more, by the way. If any atheists are brave enough, bring it on. Okay? But one of the questions they've come up in the last 40 years is proof for evolution. They say, what do you do about ERVs? And that's supposed to stop the conversation, like, oh, that's proof it came from a rock. What's an ERV? Well, the human endogenous retrovirus. 8% of all the genome is supposed to be human and HERV. Yeah. What is this talking about? Well, tonight we're going to have Donny and Matt going to come on and explain about what's a ERV. Is that evidence for evolution, or is it evidence of an amazing design? So, guys, you've been a great blessing to our ministry. Take it away. Tell them all about it.
All right. Well, Matt and I were going to be giving about 30 minutes each, and also some audience questions if anybody had any questions. So I am just going to share my screen. I'll kick us off. And okay. Let's get this started. I'm excited. One of my favorite topics. And so, okay, here's the presentation title: Dismantling Evidence for Evolution, Endogenous Retroviruses. So as Kent said, the evolutionary community, their best so-called lines of evidence for why we are all related to banana plants and whales, they do change over time. One line of evidence gets refuted, and instead of tapping out, they look to another line of evidence. And so one of their major lines of evidence today are endogenous retroviruses. So presented by Donny Badinsky. I am the founder of Stand for Truth Ministries. Matt and I work together full time to refute all objections to biblical creation and refute all evidence for evolution. And so you can check out our official website, standfortruthministries.com, where you'll find endless content. You'll find articles, videos. There's a section here answering common questions, challenges, and objections. And those comprise topics dealing with the age of the earth, again, evidence for evolution. We get into theology-related topics as well, like end times theology and salvation. And so here I've put together several presentations on the so-called best evidence for evolution. Endogenous retroviruses, chromosome 2 fusion, and pseudogenes are three major points that guardians of common descent like to look to. Today we're focusing on endogenous retroviruses. So I've written a comprehensive book on the topic, the Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook. And so this presentation is just going to be a small snapshot of the overall material we have on this topic. This book is thorough. It's technical. It's a technical argument. So in many ways, it requires a technical rebuttal. So I do recommend people check out that book if they're interested in more on this topic, and it is available now through Amazon. So I'd like to start off this presentation with what I believe are helpful quotes that we can all live by. And so the first one: believe God more and believe man less. The Bible says we should not put our faith in the wisdom of man, but in the power of God. Man is fallible, but God is infallible. He is infinite. And the Bible says holy men spake as they were moved by the Holy Ghost. And so the authority of Scripture is first, and Scripture should come first. Good science always affirms Scripture. And so the Bible claims to be the history book of the universe. And it turns out when we compare or test the claims of Genesis and the Bible with modern empirical scientific data, that science, good science, not the pseudoscience of evolutionary theory or common descent, but good science always affirms Scripture. Now, I'd like to define at least one term as we move on in the presentation, because many apologists of evolution, they'll say, you don't believe in evolution? Well, if by evolution you mean change over time, or the technical definition of evolution, biological evolution, is changes in allele frequencies in populations over generations or over time. And so if that's what you mean by evolution, then we're not going to have a problem with that. An allele being a genetic variant frequency, referring to the frequency that variant or gene is found in the population, that frequency can change. Okay, we don't disagree with change over time. If you actually read Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, the second you agree with change over time, he's not providing any evidence for why dogs here are related to banana plants, flowers, and whales. And so our phones change over time. Computers change over time. Our thinking processes change over time. So we don't disagree with change over time. The question is, what type of change are we looking at when it comes to evolution in the biological world? Is this uphill change? Is this downhill change? Is this the type of change that is necessary and required to take fish to fishermen, to take bacteria-like organisms to biologists over time? So yes, there's a continuum. Let's say in your canid family, okay, your dogs. We wouldn't have a problem with saying that domestic dogs, wolves, coyotes, dingoes are related and can be traced back to an archetype. We don't have a problem with that. What we do have a problem with, though, is saying that domestic dogs, wolves, coyotes, dingoes, and banana plants are related through common ancestry. Dogs being related, changes in allele frequencies over time, does not equate dogs and fish being related. So evolutionists, they believe in many ways that time is the hero of the story. With lots of time and mutations, selection, then you can get fish to fishermen. The problem for the evolutionists is time is actually the villain of the story for evolution, certainly not the hero. More time means more extinction, more degeneration. Their proposed mechanisms of change comprise selection, natural selection. Selection is simply a fine-tuning mechanism, keeps a species as strong as they can be. Natural selection just means differential reproduction. What does differential reproduction mean? It's as simple as this: who's reproducing the most, who's having the most babies. Okay, and it selects from what's there. Mutations are supposed to introduce the novel genetic variation for selection to act upon. But mutations are largely and overwhelmingly deleterious. They're harmful. They're disease-causing. They're not resulting in anything truly novel that the theory of evolution would require. And so fish-to-fisherman evolution, in light of the scientific data, requires a lot of imagination. Time is not going to save the day for evolution. And so here's an evolutionary tree. There's several that you can find on the internet and textbooks. And universal common ancestry would purport that all life, including, as you can see here, grasses, jellyfish, humans, fish, are related. They go back to a universal common ancestor, as you can see here at the base of the tree. Here's another tree of life that we're familiar with. Pick your creature. The evolutionists believe they're related to them. Whales, elephants, crabfish, mosquito. Here's a more sophisticated tree of life. Still the same thing. All life, including fish and bacteria, related through common ancestry. Now, us as biblical creationists, we would hold to what's called separate ancestry. So rather than saying dogs and wolves are related to banana plants, we would say there exists separate ancestry. And that's what the Bible says. The Bible in Genesis says that Adam's the first man, Eve is the mother of all living. That's what the Bible says. And it turns out that the empirical scientific data, remember, good science affirms scripture. Well, we've discovered in genetics one woman of whom we've all descended from, and one man that we've all descended from, confirming the account of origins found in Genesis. And so here we would argue that there exists separate ancestries. So you've got humans that could be traced back to a common ancestor, as well as other creatures, these being the great apes. So before we get into the dismantling of ERVs, I'd like to briefly go over what is largely agnostic to the debate, or non-differentiating. What I mean by that is there are many lines of evidence in the creation versus evolution debate that are agnostic. There's a lot of overlap, okay? If I were to say creation's true because the sky is blue, well, an evolutionist could say you're crazy because we can also explain why the sky is blue. Or they could say evolution's true because the earth is round. Sorry, flat earthers. But we would say, no, the creation model can also explain why the earth is round. So this is agnostic evidence. Both models, for the most part, can explain the data. And so these non-differentiating lines of evidence would comprise classification, homology, nested hierarchies, and so-called transitional fossils. And I'm going to get into why that is. So classification, systematics doesn't prove anything. It doesn't demonstrate evolution. If you go to a car lot, you'll see all types of modes of transportation in different categories. You'll find SUVs in one section, vans in another section, sedans in one section. And so we as humans, we like to classify things. We like to order our books. If you go to your bookshelf, you'll oftentimes see the theology books in one section. You'll find science books in another section. And we've ordered those books. That ordering process does not demonstrate relationship. Similarity does not equate ancestry or relationship. It's good design. It's good design that we can actually classify things in the biological world. So what the evolutionists like to do is they like to draw a circle so big that you can basically put anything into that circle. And then as a result, they can declare relationship. So for example, here on the screen in the image, you can see things that breathe. Okay, if we were to make a circle called things that breathe, well, now you can put any form of life in there. Lions, gorillas, babies. How about things affected by gravity? Okay, you get all living things, humans and frogs, but then you can also put in a bowling ball, put in a planet. They're affected by gravity. This doesn't declare relationship. Just because whales and pine trees are both categorized or classified as eukaryotes does not make them related. Again, man-made things. We do the same thing. Motorized transportation. We classify all kinds of vehicles. We classify our books. We order our books. The next line of evidence that they like to use is homology. These shared structures seen in the biological world. They also look to homology in DNA. So genetic level homology. As you can see here, you've got comparative anatomy, homologous structures, the forelimb, for example, between different creatures. But the thing is, humans design and build in homologous patterns. Again, this is good design, and so it is agnostic to the overall debate. Evolutionists explain these shared structures as being inherited through common descent. Us as creationists, we look to these shared structures in the same way that modes of transportation share engines in common. They have windshields, steering wheels. And so this is good design. This points to a common designer. Again, all types of modes of transportation here. You can get a company from Europe, from North America. You can get a car company from Asia, like Toyota or Honda. And there's going to be similarities. That doesn't demonstrate that those similarities were inherited from a common Arctic sedan ancestor. No, this is simply good design. Now, I want people to remember this line. It is the differences that make all the difference. Okay? It's the differences that make all the differences. The biblical creationists, we can explain similarities through common design, but it is the large differences that the evolutionary community has an impossible challenge in explaining. As a matter of fact, even in similar sequences, let's take a chimpanzee and a human. Even in similar sequences, there are huge differences in the way those sequences are expressed or regulated. Let's treat this as, in a way, a genetics lesson. So gene regulation is basically the process used to control the timing, location, and an amount in which these genes are expressed. And then gene expression is basically the process by which a gene is turned on, either to make an RNA or a protein. And so even in similar sequences, we find differences. Now, here's a major difference on the screen that I'd like to bring people's attention to, that the evolutionary community has been challenged by. So the Y chromosome is inherited paternally. I got my Y chromosome from my dad. Matt got his from his dad. My sons got their Y chromosome from me. So it's only passed down on one line. That means it lacks what's called recombination. And basically, recombination is that process during reproduction where pieces of DNA or chromosomes line up and exchange genetic information to produce new combinations of alleles every generation. That's why we look different. That's why kids look different. A husband and a wife could theoretically have 1 million kids. Every single child would look different because they have pre-existing diversity. Okay, there's no recombination in the Y chromosome because it lacks that chromosomal counterpart. And so it should be more stable. It's not going to accumulate as much change or alteration as what's called biparentally inherited DNA. So notice this on the screen. This comes right from the conventional literature. This is fascinating. So this is a human Y chromosome compared to the chimpanzee Y chromosome. As you can see visually, they're completely different. They're nothing alike. But the evolutionary community, they believe that chimpanzees are our closest cousin. They believe humans and chimpanzees go back to a common ancestor about 6 million years ago. You can see this in the visual, 6 million years. But wait a minute. Their Y chromosomes are totally different. The human Y chromosome is only about half, the chimpanzee Y chromosome is half the size as the human Y chromosome. They're only about 35% the same when you consider overall gene content, architecture, and size differences. As a matter of fact, when you bring in the gorilla Y chromosome, the gorilla Y and the human Y are more similar to each other than either are to the chimpanzee Y. This is data that the evolutionary community can't explain. Remember, creationists, we can explain the similarities, but it's the differences that make all the difference. These massive differences are too much of a problem for the evolutionary community to explain. And so this is what's called preclusionary data. This is a differentiating way to answer this question of ancestry. So the next one is so-called transitional forms. They have a few interesting candidates they like to look to. Tiktaalik, which is the famous so-called fishapod. They like to look to Archaeopteryx. Okay, they've really only got a select few. If evolution was true and common descent was true, there should be no question as to whether or not it happened based on the so-called fossil record. Okay, because there should be hundreds of thousands of these so-called transitional forms. And yet we sit here all day arguing about a couple interesting ones, which are basically just mosaics. They're a little bit more difficult to classify. Well, in the design world, man designs hard to classify things as well. There's certain tools that are a little more difficult to classify. There's vehicles with the invention of what's called the crossover SUV. As you can see here, there's what's called the Jeep Gladiator at the top, your Ford Flex, Dodge Journey. They're not quite an SUV. They're not quite a van. They're in the middle. They are a crossover. They're hard to classify. So man designs interesting vehicles in the same way that God designs biological organisms that are in many ways mosaic. Take the platypus, the duck-billed platypus, for example. So the evolutionary community would look at something like the crossover SUV and they'd say, oh, this is the perfect transitional. And what they could do is line these up. So for example, in the fossil record, they like to take different organisms, line them up. Lining things up doesn't prove anything. The military, they've invented what's called the military amphibious assault vehicle. So a military amphibious assault vehicle, it's not necessarily good or designed just for the land, nor is it perfectly designed for the sea. No, it's designed for that transitional environment between sea and land. A tank is not good in the water, and a boat is not good on land. And so your military amphibious assault vehicle is the perfect design or mosaic of those different types of vehicles for its environment. And so again, this is good design. You could take that military amphibious assault vehicle, put it right in between a ship, a military ship, and a tank, and say one evolved into the other. But that's imagination. Lining things up doesn't prove fish to fisherman evolution. You got a unicycle, tricycle, bicycle, and a four-wheeler. Okay, I could predict there must be a tricycle out there. We find a tricycle, we line it up, there's evolution. No, this is the logic that proponents of evolution look to. Your next line of evidence they like to look to is nested hierarchies. The fact that humans and chimpanzees look a little more alike than, let's say, a human and a fish. Well, nested hierarchies occur naturally. When God created a human has to, by definition, be more similar to one creature than another. So yes, we share more in terms of anatomy, morphology, physiology, and genetics with a chimpanzee than we do with a fish or a bacteria. This is just a natural hierarchy. We do the same with modes of transportation. A sedan shares a lot more in common with an SUV than it would with an airplane or an unpowered vehicle like a bicycle. Again, this just points to design. Human engineers design in homologous patterns. Human engineers also design in nested hierarchical patterns. Fencing pliers. I was talking about earlier how you have some things that humans make, okay, that are difficult to classify. And your fencing pliers is an example of a tool that could be hard to classify, but it is designed for what it's supposed to do. Okay. So I want to move on to what the evolutionary community would argue is a differentiating line of evidence. So not necessarily agnostic, and that's endogenous retroviruses. The question that I like to ask, and the question that I want the audience to ask themselves is this: are ERVs really the ancient remnants of past viral infection, or are they created units of DNA function? I'm going to show you why ERVs are not good evidence for common descent. So firstly, what are endogenous retroviruses? Well, according to the evolutionary model, an ERV is basically a stretch of DNA found in your DNA that got there when one of your ancestors was infected by a retrovirus. So this is how the story goes. They believe humans, chimpanzees, and primates, they share these ERV sequences in the same locations, genetic locations, because they inherited them from a past common ancestor. So a past common ancestor millions of years ago was hit with a viral infection, and that was passed on. And so today we have them because we inherited them. But the question is, are these DNA units really the ancient remnants of retroviruses? And I'm going to show you why they are not. Okay. Right in their literature, they'll admit that these so-called fossil viruses or fossil DNA units, we did not observe them today accumulate, but they would have accumulated in the past, millions of years ago. And so right here, excerpt after excerpt that you can see. So there is an important distinction though. So if you look at the visual here, there is what's called an exogenous retrovirus like HIV, and then an endogenous retrovirus. So right up here, you see horizontal transmission. What that is if you get infected with a retrovirus, again, HIV is a common retrovirus, then that's passed on horizontally from person to person. So it's not passed on to the next generation. But as the story goes, you have an endogenous retrovirus, N meaning it occurs from within, exogenous from outside. Okay, horizontal transmission. An endogenous is the result of vertical transmission. So if a retrovirus infects a germ cell, right, you got somatic cells like your skin cell, okay, but you also got your germ cells like reproductive cells. And so if a virus infiltrates a germ cell, it can be passed on vertically, where now the progeny has that viral DNA in every single one of its cells. So there is that important distinction there between an exogenous retrovirus and an endogenous retrovirus. Now, endogenous retroviruses represent about 8% of the human genome, and it belongs to a larger category of elements called transposable elements that are broken up into different categories. That makes up about 45% of the genome. Now, one major assumption is that these elements, the assumption by the evolutionists, are non-functional. But it actually turns out that every single one of these classes of transposable elements or retroelements are highly functional in determining cell types, gene regulation, functional in embryological development. For example, the placenta. That's an essential biological structure for the development of a human being. And it essentially allows for the continual circulation between mother and baby. That's how the baby is going to get the nutrients, the gases, and also certain waste products. That's how they're going to circulate from mother to baby. The placenta could not be possible if it weren't for retroelements, specifically an endogenous retrovirus. In the lab, they actually snipped out, in the mouse genome, they snipped out one of these retrotransposons that the evolutionist assumes are the result of ancient viral infections. They snipped it out. So the mouse is growing in the embryo. They snip it out. It stops growing. It dies. Because biological organisms require these elements for life, okay, for their function. So the structure of the ERV is a big point here. So as you can see, these are different types of transposable elements on the screen. Your last one, this is the endogenous retrovirus. So the way they're built is similar to an exogenous retrovirus. This is your primary reason why evolutionists think endogenous retroviruses are the ancient remnants of retroviruses, because they share sequence similarity to retroviruses. So their structure is this right here. You got LTRs. Those are long terminal repeats. They act as promoters and enhancers. Okay. And a promoter is basically, it's a sequence of DNA. It's like a genetic switch. And it's where the RNA polymerase binds and aids or initiates transcription, right? So basic genetics, you got DNA transcribed into RNA. That's transcription, translated into a protein. Okay. And so much of the genome comprises what's called these solo LTRs. The evolutionary community assumes those were once ERVs. But as I pointed out, these solo LTRs, they're actually serving as binding sites for initiating or enhancing gene expression. We talked about earlier how gene expression is that process by which DNA directs the synthesis of proteins or just an RNA product. And so these are all essential functional roles. So why do humans and chimpanzees share LTRs in common? Because it's good design. This is put here by the designer. Okay. And so the ERV does look like the retrovirus. But the question is why? And we have a really good answer for that. In the middle of your LTRs in the ERV, you have the GAG, PRO, POL, and ENV. ENV stands for envelope protein. And then your other genes basically code for what's called reverse transcriptase and integrase. So retroviruses, why they're called retroviruses, is because they can do what's called reverse transcription. They can reverse the flow of genetic information. So what's transcription? DNA to RNA. Reverse transcription is that process in reverse. So from DNA to RNA, or from RNA to DNA, and then from there, the cell's machinery can copy that DNA into viral RNA molecules. Okay, and that's all coded with these genes in the middle. Okay, so here's the question then. Why do ERVs share sequence similarity to exogenous retroviruses? Very simple. So we've got paper after paper demonstrating the function of these ERVs. Two of their major functional roles involve aiding the immune system. And so we all have antiviral programs on our computer. God designed living organisms with their very own antiviral programs or units, and those are ERVs. And so they actually fight off viral infections. Notice this from the conventional literature, switching sides, how endogenous retroviruses protect us from viral infections. This is fascinating. Not evidence for common descent, guys. Long disregarded as junk DNA. So as you can see, they're admitting that they once assumed that these interesting DNA elements were junk, but we now know they're functional. Long disregarded as junk DNA or genomic dark matter, ERVs have turned out to what? Represent important components of the antiviral immune response. Not only regulate cell immune activation, but may even directly target invading viral pathogens. Every aspect or component of the ERV that we went over, the GAG, the POL, the ENV, they directly help with that process of fighting off viral infections. Notice this. One focus will be on recent advances in the role of ERVs as regulators of gene expression. Now, for them to carry out this role, though, it is well understood that they have to look like the exogenous retroviruses that they're fighting off to carry out that role. A major function that cancer researchers are looking at to fight off tumors that these ERVs can do, and this is an important one, it's called viral mimicry. So they can mimic the exogenous retrovirus in order for the immune system to destroy tumor cells. Now, how they do this is transcribed ERVs in tumor cells, because tumor cells, anybody who understands cancer knows tumor cells can evade detection by the immune system. There's a protein, it's called the P53 protein. Many people understand the P53 protein as the guardian of the genome. Highly sophisticated, well-designed protein. Evolutionists, tell me how this protein evolved. That's what I'd like. I want to see the precursor proteins to the P53 protein. And so this whole process is mediated by this amazingly designed protein, and transcribed ERVs in these tumor cells, they give the appearance that the cell is being invaded by a retrovirus because they look like retroviruses. They're mimicking the retrovirus. And so the immune system sees this and targets that cell with destruction. And as a result, destroys those tumors. But the only way the ERV can actually carry out that function and perform viral mimicry is if it looks like the exogenous retrovirus. So when an evolutionist asks, why does the ERV look like the exogenous retrovirus? They don't understand the fact that many of these functional roles associated with ERVs can only be carried out if they share that sequence similarity to the exogenous retrovirus. If people that like mob movies, mafia movies, if you have an officer or an FBI agent who's infiltrating the mob or infiltrating the mafia, he has to look the part. He has to look like a representative of the mob. If he shows up in his police uniform and he's got his name badge, Donny or Matt working for the police, well, he's not going to last very long. And so these ERVs have to look the part in order to perform these functions. So as we start to wind down here, notice this, right from the conventional literature. HERVs, when you see an H, that simply refers to human. So human ERVs. They appear to play important roles in physiology, fetal development, and human evolution. Of course, they throw human evolution in there because they're assuming that creatures have evolved over time. Notice this part. If the accidental infection of a mammalian ancestor by an exogenous retrovirus, so they're assuming this happened, had never occurred, the placenta and the mammals that produce it, including humans, would have never existed. What's that saying? It's saying without ERVs, we wouldn't exist. Mammals wouldn't exist. I like to exist. Matt likes to exist. Dr. Hoven likes to exist. Okay. And so why do we share ERVs with other forms of life? Well, in the same way that modes of transportation all have an engine in common. If a Chevy Cruze or my Dodge Caravan did not have an engine, they're not going to get very far. These vehicles need engines to perform what they were designed to do. And living organisms require these ERV sequences to survive. Again, they're important in embryological development. They're necessary for the placenta. They act in the immune system, cell stress responses. These are just a couple of the functions. We don't have too much time here, but I could go in hours and hours explaining these functional roles. And so here's just a few: retroviral promoters in the human genome, antiviral immunity. Again, you can screenshot these slides if you'd like and have a look at these papers. Notice this: scientists identify new beneficial function of endogenous retroviruses in what? Immune response. They fight off harmful and damaging viruses. They amplify immune responses. These are very important roles. And so here's a few more papers. Again, without ERVs and ERV-like units, we wouldn't be here. And so the reason why we share them is very simple. It's because it's good design. Notice this: the pervasive retrotransposons that populate the genome have a powerful capacity to influence genes in chromatin. This specific ERV in humans can modify the higher order 3D structure of chromatin during early primate development. Now, a lot of times you'll see evolutionists that are really desperate. They don't want to tap out. They'll say, but these functions were expected. They didn't predict them, but these are expected. Oh, really? Because this is right from the conventional literature. What does this say? Endogenous retroviruses as a what? Unexpected? No, an unexpected ally in the regulation of human immune systems. See, as creationists, we expect treasure in the genome. They expect junk. Because we expect treasure, we can predict function. And when we find function in what was largely considered or assumed to be junk DNA, we're not surprised. And here's the last thing I want to point out. This is from a 2021 paper, and they admit our knowledge about endogenous retroviral elements involved in cell immune responses is what? Constantly increasing. We're just in the beginning stages of understanding the DNA language. If I put a kid, I have 3 kids, one is 7, one's 5, one's 2. If I put all 3 of them in front of the hood of a car, open up the hood and said, what do we need? What don't we need? Dr. Hovind points this all the time. It's a great analogy. They're not going to know what these parts are for. They're going to start pulling out everything. What if I was hired as a proofreader to go over to Russia and start editing their books? I don't speak Russian. I'm not going to be able to tell what's a mistake and what's not. And that's how it is in our DNA and the genomes of living organisms. We're just in the infancy of understanding truly how amazing and sophisticated it is. And so over time, we're going to find even more functional roles associated with these ERVs. Now, this slide I like to use because when you ask these evolutionists to demonstrate empirically how an ERV or ERV-like sequence can acquire these types of functions, they're literally required for us to exist. So how do they evolve the ability to function in embryological development? When the baby's growing in the womb, they are prone to being attacked by pathogens and harmful viruses. Well, there's actually ERVs that are turned on during that process where the baby's growing that protects the baby from invading viruses. I want to know how these evolved. If evolution is true, how did these evolve? And they'll say things like co-option, beneficial mutation accumulation, but all this is story time from the evolutionists. They just assume it. In their papers, they'll say, oh, these have been co-opted. Oh, these have evolved. They'll just say it. But as creationists, we know how to read between the lines. They don't have actual evidence for the evolution of these amazing functions. And so all you got to say to them when they invoke imagination and story, just say, cool story, bro. And the biggest thing is, randomly inserting viral DNA into the genome of a biological organism, it's more likely going to disrupt genetic functionality rather than improve upon it. And as we've seen through numerous papers, these ERVs comprise very important functional roles. Some of them of which if we didn't have these ERVs, we would not exist. And so I'm going to wrap it up there and hand it over to Matt for now.
All right, man, 30 minutes is not enough, huh? It goes fast. All right, so let me share screen. Haven't used this one yet, so it works good. All right, I'm going to be talking to you guys as though I'm on an airplane, and we only have about 10 minutes to go over some things. So I'm just going to be scattered. I'm just going to go wild. So some of you guys might like certain topics, some of you might not. So I'm going to cover a lot of different topics so everyone can get a little bit of something out of it. So if I want to convince you of something in science, we have to look at p-value. It's called statistical probability. And in this case, it's about convergence. It's about independent, unrelated sources converging on the same conclusion that can actually be deemed as proof of something. So yes, I can attack evolution all day long. That's so easy to do, it's almost ridiculous. So instead, I'm going to use the biblical creation model to refute the evolutionary model because it's just so much better. And when people say out there, oh, there's no such thing as a biblical creation model, well, there is. I actually wrote the book on it. So the biblical creation model makes very clear statements as fact. Mankind was created. They were created on the last day, day 6. So there was a creation event. There was a global flood, Noah's flood, they call it, very popular. And there was the Tower of Babel. So there are global flood traditions around the world. We would expect that to be that case if there was actually a global flood that wiped out humanity. Now, why are the stories a little bit different? It's no big deal. Any game of telephone is going to show you when you're young that when you orally pass things down over generations, things get lost over time. But there's always a historical true account. So when you go back to the original ones like the Amelia Eilish and the Babylon stories, there's multiple versions and they're inconsistent. Even their arc doesn't work. So then we discovered that there was an actual Tower of Babel. This stone was discovered. It has King Solomon on the side of it because he actually rebuilt the original temple and did a really good job on it, actually. And that temple was actually seen by Herodotus in the 5th century. He actually describes what it looked like, how tall it was, where it was. And then Alexander the Great liked the temple so much that he wanted it rebuilt, but much better. So he ordered it destroyed and decided, I'm going to rebuild it, but he died in conquest. And then it ended the tower. So all we have now is the foundation structure of it. So we have a physical location of it as well. Now the next question comes. If the biblical story is true, what would we expect to find? And if the evolutionary story was true, what would we expect to find? The evolutionary model says that there is humans evolved in Africa and then left Africa. The biblical creation model talks about Noah's Ark coming to rest on the mountains of Ararat, somewhere around here, and then they migrated down and built a tower together, and then the people dispersed from that region. Okay, what would genetics tell us then? Well, if mankind lived for 200,000 to 300,000 years ago in Africa only as a continent, why don't we find more mutations occurring in these people groups as they diversify and fill up the continent? We only find a very small handful. What do we actually find when we look inside the genome? Oh, look at that. All of the haplogroups come right out of the Middle East, exactly where we would expect it to find if the Tower of Babel story was true and not evolution. Pretty simple. How about phenotypic diversity? That might be a new word, but phenotypic just means looks, visual looks. How do people look compared to one another? If the story of evolution was true, Africans would clearly have much more phenotypic diversity than anybody else in the world because they've lived for hundreds of thousands of years longer than any other people group before the other people group evolved outside of Africa. So there would be a nested hierarchical pattern with people, with Africans being the most diverse. What did we find when we actually ran those numbers on phenotypic diversity with people? It was exactly the same among all people group. Now, I know when evolutionists look in the mirror, they really see themselves looking back at it as a primate, but we're not talking about a mental disease right now. So we're going to look at human beings, and we're going to see that we have massive phenotypic diversity between all humans, but primates have almost none. Matter of fact, we can look at all the different primates, and we see this very similar consistency. No matter where we look, they have low phenotypic diversity, and humans have very, very high. It would be what we would expect to see if humans had a much more genetic diversity built into them, and Noah and his family got off the ark and then migrated around the world. It matches what we would expect to find much better. So humans in the past, sure, they would have looked different. They would have had much better genetics. They would have had much better quality for living in outside environments. And then as over time, people get lazier, we start hybridizing foods, the diet changes, we live indoors, we get weaker and softer. And then we have modern humans today that are nowhere near like what our ancient people look like. But the unique thing is we have a phenotypic diversity between every single people group exactly the same. That could only be the case if the biblical young earth creation model is true, because all people are related to each other and very short time ago. Very, very simple. Then we go to the secular literature yet again. And what do we find? Humanity seems to have only existed for about 5,000 years. That's not very long. Look at this. The span of recorded human history is roughly 5,000 years old. Civilizations popped up around the world about 5,000 years ago. The oldest pyramid, about 4,000, 400 years ago. Math, 4,000 years ago, the oldest math that they've ever found. Mathematics around the world. They say, it seems like it developed about 5,000 years ago, no matter where we look. The origins of brewing, beer and alcohol, about 5,000 years ago. No, same exact thing. How about medicine? Same thing. Or horoscopes and astrology, 5,000 years ago. Same thing. How about the history of medicine? 5,000 years ago. How about irrigation? When people started cultivating different crops and irrigating things, same exact thing about 5,000 years ago. It's just so ridiculous. No matter where we go, the invention of writing, about 5,000 years ago. We look at all the different writing systems. 5,000 years ago, they all just seem to arise out of nowhere. Here's a historian mentioning about writing systems. I'll see if it plays. Pretty interesting, right? They want us to believe that humans lived in Africa for 200 to 300,000 years and couldn't figure out how to do one of those things. They couldn't figure out any of it. Not one writing system, not one mathematical system, nothing. They just ceased to exist until they left Africa, and then all of a sudden, boom, we were instantly inventing everything at the same time. So what is the oldest writing system currently used in the world? We have the Chinese writing system. The interesting thing about having this as the oldest one in the world is pretty nice, actually, because when we look at what their words actually are, they're a bunch of combined letters. Look at that. We have tower, undertaking, and united. That sounds a lot like a biblical story, doesn't it? How about boat? Oh, look at that. It's a vessel with 8 people in it. Oh, could that be Noah? Could it possibly be? How about to create something? Oh, speak dust to life, walk from mud. Oh my gosh, amazing, right? How about this? But a garden, like the Garden of Eden, maybe. Look at that. It's an entrapped enclosure with a wall with a fountain coming out of it, with water flowing from 4 directions. And it means dust breathe in 2 enclosure garden persons. Incredible. So, I mean, the evidence is literally all around us. And the evolutionary community, they actually know that this is a problem. Did you know that? They actually know that this exists. It's called the sapient paradox. With brains like ours, why did prehistoric humans wait millennia to start civilizations? Right? What does that make any sense to you? Like, they really want us to believe that there's people all around the world that never met each other. And then all at the same time, what did they do? They all invented the exact same things, even though they never met one another. How ridiculous is that? They didn't meet each other, but don't worry. At the same time, they waited 195,000 years just to all creatively come up with the exact same things, no matter where you look. It's ridiculous. And then what happens if we go to these individual people and we test them? Let's see, how old are these people actually genetically? Well, That's going to shock you as well. Because when we look in the genome, the scientists confirmed that the human genome began to rapidly diversify just 5,000 years ago. Oh, there's that number again. Shocker, isn't it? Look at this. The maximum likelihood for accelerated growth, 5,115 years ago, maximum. When we look at harmful genetic mutations adding up, look, in addition, certain genes they learned harbor only young, more damaging mutations that surfaced less than 5,000 years ago. Amazing, isn't it? And here's another one. Gene mutations began showing up less than 5,000 years ago, about 200 to 400 generations ago. These are biblical timelines, people. This doesn't point to evolution at anywhere. And then when we move into molecular clocks, like I was showing you what happens when you test individual people, we get the same conclusion. We get about 6,500 years ago, the most recent common ancestor of all humans. Evolutionists like to say, well, that's just the most recent common one. Of course, that's not Eve. What are you talking about? You try to explain to me then from your evolutionary model where a global bottleneck happened 6,500 years ago and created the first woman that we're all related to. It doesn't exist. It's just such a bad rescue device. So they even admit, look, using the new clock that discovered Eve lived about 6,000 years ago, they actually worry, they panic because it goes against what they need to be true. And do these clocks work? Of course they do. They're actually used by the FBI. They use these mutation rate clocks because they work good. They don't use the evolutionary nonsense made up ones because they're pathetic. And they look, this observed rate has implications for both forensic identity testing and the inference of human history. So they admit that it's pointing to the history of humanity by looking at these things. And then they say, well, these pedigree mutations rate, maybe they're counting somatic mutations, which are mutations that don't get passed on. It increases the rate. Not the case. They admit right here in this study that nope, they are not passed. The mutations that are passed on are the only things that are counted. And this person admits they conclude that selection is unlikely to be a major factor at the underlying differences between the phylogenetic and pedigree mutation rates. So if you ever want a solid case for refuting deep time evolution, just look at the difference between the pedigree mutation rate and the genealogical mutation rate, the pedigree one. And you'll see down the line that when we observe the mutation rates, they're extremely fast and they go right back to the biblical timeline. So these are some of my favorites. Here's a great chart, like what we observe versus what they estimated to be true. Literally the exact opposite. And then some of them even admit, well, there is a general perception that there's a competition to get older dates and there's kudos in it, meaning they get their paychecks from this kind of stuff. This is like, you want to prove evolution is true, you got to submit to peer review. If you want to be more popular, you want to be in those headlines, give us an older date. That's where that comes from. But look at this. They admit this right in this study. An article that was written recently. The consequences of humanity being incredibly inbred is that we are all much more related more closely than our intuition even suggests. But the genetic isotope occurred much more recently, somewhere between 5,300 and 2,200 BC. They admit the biblical timeline is what we keep seeing. And then the critics come along and they say, well, it's possible, though, that we don't have very many genealogies going back with pedigree mutation rates. So the deeper it goes back, those mutations would eventually get erased and it would slow that clock down. Here's how to easily refute that. Look at chicken studies. This chicken study was done by looking at two different genealogies going back 50 generations on each one. They showed that the mutation rate is basically identical to the human one, and it's extremely fast and way too fast for evolution to be true. And here's another thing. It's 15 times faster than they expected it to be based on evolution. And I ran the numbers, which you can find right here. And the ancestor to all living chickens only goes back around 4,125 years ago. Amazing. And then when we line that up with human genealogies, well, guess what? In the British Museum, they have something called the King's List, the British King's List. It's an unbroken chain of royalty going all the way back from Queen Elizabeth II to a son that was born to Shem on the Ark itself. And guess what? They matched the genealogy pedigree mutation rates that we would expect to find on how many generations existed until today. You just can't make this stuff up. Then we have population growth rates. Human beings populate and fill up the earth extremely fast. How in the world could we have lived in Africa for 200,000 years and just completely ignored population growth rates? It makes no sense. So anyway, we're going to get into Q&A in just a minute. Just a couple more things. When we look at the oldest trees on earth, nothing goes back past 5,000 years. I know, shocker, right? Pretty simple. How about the oldest desert in the world? Oh, that's young too. shocker, they admit like, oh, wow, it rapidly became from a grassland about 4,000 years ago to the dry Sahara Desert that we find today. Then we have helium diffusion rates that indicate the Earth is young. That goes back about 5,100 years as well. And then we look at the magnetic field decay. Look at that, 5,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. It's all amazing. How about when they build towers and pyramids around the world? Did you know when you look at these pyramids from around the world, this is all their different locations. They all have something in common. No matter where you look, they all use the same mathematical meter to build their buildings off of. Isn't that amazing? What are the odds that they would all use the same mathematics system? That could only make sense if the people literally came from one area and knew the same thing, and the Tower of Babel messed up their ability to talk to one another anymore. They dispersed and they all built the same thing that they knew how to build using the same math. It's so logical. It's so simple. It's so easy to refute evolution and confirm ours just with what we know to be true. So let's wrap this up. I always say that we explain genetic diversity better, genetic similarity better, genetic mutation rates better, human origins better, the fossil record we explain better. You just name it. We explain literally everything so much better. And that's why I like this chart right here. I show direct head-to-head comparisons from predictions that were made by young Earth creationists versus evolutionists, and we dominate down the line. All right, let's go to some audience Q&A if we have time. I went as fast as I could. I don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Here we go.
Okay, very, very good, brother. We got all that information in there within the hour time frame. And so to the audience that has listened, if you do have a question or two in the next few minutes before we shut it down, feel free to put it in the live chat and I can see it from the side so we can answer it. But these are important points to consider, because not only are we refuting the best so-called evidence for evolution, like endogenous retroviruses, like the so-called chromosome 2 fusion or pseudogenes, which are just like ERVs. They're necessary to sustain healthy life processes. Okay. And so a lot of their best so-called arguments rely on the junk DNA concept. But the junk DNA concept has been dismantled. It's been overturned. Junk DNA is junk science. There is information. I couldn't really get into this, but I got a whole presentation on junk DNA. I spoke at our conference last year. There's evidence for over 80% genomic activity in the human genome. And this is biochemical activity, but what the evolutionists try to argue or assert is that this is just noise. This is just spurious transcription. But here's the thing. Every time you add a single nucleotide to a growing RNA chain, what are you consuming, Matt? ATP. You're consuming energy. And so if all of this genome-wide activity was simply noise and not representing real function, then evolutionary processes over millions of years should have removed all of this baggage, because guess what? That activity, if it's just spurious, it would be wasteful of energy and resources for the cell. And so that tells us that that activity is real, beneficial, and functional activity. And what is found in that activity is ERVs, pseudogenes, ALU sequences, all of these various classes of retrotransposons. And so that tells us that those DNA elements are also what, Matt? Functional.
Yeah, if we can't be born without them, that's the end of the human race.
Right.
So what did we do before they existed?
Oh, exactly. I showed a paper in my presentation where they admit that if we didn't have these ERVs, we would not exist. So I'm not surprised that for the most part, all biological organisms have these transposable elements in common. Then they'll oftentimes point to, as you know, Matt, they'll point to these what are called integration scars or target site duplications in the genome. And they'll say, oh, these are lines of evidence that external infection has happened. But you know, these transposable elements, one of their functions is called retrotranspositioning. So they can move through cut and paste or copy and paste. They're called jumping genes. They can move along the chromosome, or they can pop in and out of the genome from one chromosome to another. Whenever they do that, internally, they leave behind these same scars. And so it is the evolutionist that assumes that these scars or these marks or these signatures are there due to external infection, when in fact it's due to the internal mobility of these functional transposable elements. Matt, did you want to add to that at all, brother?
No, I like it. I just hope that the audience understands like how good of an argument it is for us, because a lot of critics still go to that as their best evidence when it's so easily refuted. They don't consider that there is another option. Like, where did these come from? They need a host to exist in the first place, right? So where would these come from? There's only one other answer to that, and it makes sense that they would be created elements. They're beneficial to us.
Well, that's a good point. And before we wrap things up, I want to make that point because firstly, I've got hours and hours and hours worth of presentation on ERVs, as you know, Matt, on my channel. With the limited time we have here, about an hour in this awesome conference, we can't cover everything. There's a bigger picture question that the evolutionists fail to answer or counter. What is the origin of retroviruses? Retroviruses require a host to replicate. And so tell me, evolutionists, what came first, the retrovirus or the host? Because the retrovirus can't come first, because the retrovirus requires a host to replicate. And so the creationist has the better answer that these harmful retroviruses originated from host genomes, and they became harmful after the fall due to mutations and degeneration. Kent, great to have you back, brother.
Yes, sir. Thank you, guys. Awesome, great stuff. Evolution. Now, you realize when you smash at ERVs, they're going to go on to something else. They don't want to believe in God.
That's right. It's a hard issue.
Doesn't matter what you tell them, they'll come up with something else. So
because they don't want to tap out. They want to be willingly ignorant, Kent. They want to believe they're related to banana plants. They really do so badly.
Yeah, they want to act like an animals. Why?
That's
Amen.
right. No
well,
more.
Now, the Canadians and the British are pretty close. Do you know, does England have a 4th of July?
I don't know. I know we had Canada Day on July 1st. We set off some fireworks.
Well, you do have a 4th of July. You just don't celebrate it.
That's right.
Good one.
Thank you, guys. Keep up the good work for the Lord. And we got fireworks going on right now down here to celebrate our independence from England. You guys ever going to become independent from me, you think?
Before Christ returns? Probably not.
Probably not. Amen. Thank you, guys. Keep up the great work. Celebration time down at the lake, everybody.
God bless. Matt.